closed off, so you couldn't get to the outside world that way. So there's this effort to have quite a few boats and ships coming again to Gaza, bringing humanitarian supplies, and also just demonstrating they have the right to have free access to the rest of the world, to come and go, that the rest of the world can visit Gaza, and people from Gaza can visit the rest of the world instead of being imprisoned by Israel the way they still, to a great degree, are. I believe I'm not one of the organizers of any of the flotillas, but from what I understand, there are about 19 different groups around the world that are working on this, and but there are not 19 different boats. A number of different groups are cooperating to get a boat. It's very expensive to try to do something like this. And one of the boats or ships, I guess they're probably mostly large enough to be called a ship, is the U.S. They're calling it a boat. The U.S. boat to Gaza is one of them, largely organized by people in New York, and from what I am hearing, largely consisting, with many exceptions, but largely consisting of people from New York and that area. There's an international boat to break the siege of Gaza, which will consist of people from various different countries, including the U.S., and I'm expecting to go on that boat and be part of the flotilla this time, which is the first time I'll be taking part. And that will happen. We don't know exactly when that will happen. As I say, I'm not one of the organizers of it, but I will be taking part in it. I hope people will pay attention because, as you know, it's dangerous. And I'd like all of us to be safe, and I feel we're less likely to be killed or injured if enough people are paying attention to what goes on. And this will be late in June at some point.
Hey, let me ask you another question. This is a question dear to the hearts of both Clayton and myself. What do you do when you are going about your business, a very noble business it is, and you run into either some official or some gadfly on the sideline who says, you're an evil person for what you're doing because what you're doing makes you anti-Semitic? What do you do when that happens?
Well, that, of course, is the attack that is used often. It's the kind of smear that's meant to both do two things, and it often does it with people. One is to intimidate people so that they will stop doing what really is an ethical activity, so that they'll stop that, because usually people that are trying to live morally and ethically don't like to be called, offensive names. So it's meant to do that. It's also meant to undermine your effectiveness so that other people will think, oh, that's a bad person, that person is ignorant and bigoted and full of hate, or whatever that's meant to imply. So that's why they do it. But what I usually respond, there's several responses. One is that I have a life history. I'm not young, and people can see it's a life history that shows that I oppose bigotry, that I'm, against discrimination. I believe we're all should be treated with respect and compassion. So that there's no life history to support that charge. What I find is, if you're looking for the source, the groups that are creating anti-Semitism, which is hostility towards the Jewish population, the groups that are creating this kind of hostility are the Israeli government with what it's doing, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, all of these that consistently, intentionally link these Israeli atrocities to the Jewish population of the world as a whole. They're the ones that are doing that. All of the mainstream, I'm sad to say, but all the large mainstream national Jewish organizations in the United States that I'm aware of consistently link Israeli actions, including the massacre in Gaza, to Jewishness. These are the entities that are creating anti-Semitism. And I'm not Jewish, but if I were, I would be outraged at these groups that are doing this. And I think that more people, and many people are opposing it.
Allison, I'm one of the
dissidents who are speaking out.
Allison,
We just don't hear them very often on CNN.
Allison, I'm one of that's our problem is the media. This is the reason I started the Free American, because the way the media covered what happened at Waco. Oh yeah, we had to justify. Well, we're going to help the government justify killing 17 little children. These organizations and many of these Zionist organizations own the newspapers, own the radio stations, own ABC and Walt Disney, for God's sakes. So. That's why the Palestinians are always the bad guys on TV. The Arabs are always and they're moving us towards a third world war predicted by Albert Pike with the Muslims. Who's behind that? I mean, is this it would seem like these elitists are sacrificing, are willing to sacrifice 6 million Jews in a heartbeat right there in Israel by provoking a war.
But Allison, I didn't get the answer. I certainly wasn't accusing you of anti-Semitism, because
I know.
I believe anti-Semitism is a sign of intellectuality. But how do you deal with it personally when you formulate your argument as articulately as you can, which is very articulate, and you're met with this stone wall of smear? What do you do?
Fortunately, that's actually not what happens. So I think that's what makes it, not as difficult for me as it might be. Because actually, I do have a chance to speak on this issue around the country quite a bit. I just spoke down in Southern California at University of California, Irvine, and San Diego, both. And what I consistently find around the country is I'm not met with that. Audiences are extremely receptive and concerned and ask, for the most part, very good questions. There are only a few individuals, and they are Israel partisans, who will they're the ones that will try to use this kind of smear, although rarely do they say it directly to me. That has certainly happened on a number of occasions, but not that often. More often it's just said on blogs or elsewhere or to other people. So really, largely, I don't meet that. I find most people very responsive, very interested, quite concerned, and often very friendly, very positive. Both from audiences and campuses all around the country, both ones that are liberal and ones that are conservative. Without exception, I've found a very receptive, there's been great receptivity to this and minimal hostility. The hostility only comes really from the most rabid Israel partisans. I think there are even some people in the audiences that hear me at times that have come expecting to be hostile to me or to challenge me. And I think some of them, there are cases where afterwards I've had conversations with them, and in some cases, I think even they are starting to reconsider somewhat. Now, those are the exceptions. Most of those who come to challenge me have their pre-planned questions that sometimes they've gotten from these organizations that work to organize on behalf of Israel. So, most of them I don't. I'm not under the illusion that I've reached them. But in some cases, I think that has begun. Yeah. So in that sense, it's not as hard as you were describing it.
Well, it's what's happened to me and John throughout the years. I mean, when I started the militias, I had no idea, that there was any of the information that I have on the whole Jewish-Palestinian conflict or the Jewish question. I started the militias because of what happened at Waco, because I thought the American people deserved to be protected, and I thought that was our job. I thought that was our law. But suddenly, the Jewish groups, the ADL and Southern Poverty Law, are all calling me anti-Semitic, calling me racist.
Maybe I'll mention before I have to go here, because it was part of the question, was also about this whole Islamophobia and who's behind that. And I think that's such an important question for people to look into. Fortunately, there's an excellent article was written about it not too long ago by I think the writer's name was Max Blumenthal. We will have a booklet of it on our website very soon, so people can print it out and hopefully hand it to other people. But it's an excellent article, a very thorough article showing who is financing and organizing and largely creating and certainly increasing Islamophobia, and it is, once again, Israel partisan. Pamela Geller is one of them. There are some of the other names I can't think of right now. The AIPAC and the ADL are connected to it. And this is not, quote, I know what all of us, to a degree, get accused of, oh, these are conspiracy theories. I get that probably a little less often because I try always to be very precise in what I'm saying and the things that I write, usually have footnotes, etc. But so this is one of those cases that has it's a meticulously documented report by a very good journalist who himself is Jewish, who shows quite clearly who is really such an important factor in pushing this Islamophobia, and that it is once again being done on behalf of Israel. People need to learn these facts, and I know you say them. We need to say them with great clarity and supporting them with the facts, and I think that's making a difference. More of us are waking up. We have these alternative radio programs on the Internet and sometimes even on the airwaves. We have the Internet, so there's much more ability to learn from one another and get our information out than there was, a dozen years ago.
Let me ask you this, Allison. If the reception that you get at the events that you attend and present at, if that reception is good for most people, where is the disconnect between that reception and government action?
Yeah, that's another great question. The disconnect is, of course, at my events, the most that will be there will be a few hundred people. Probably the largest number of people ever at any of my events has maybe been 500. Maybe 600. Well, I guess there's one with 800, but
anyway.
Normally we're talking at most a few hundred people, and often we're talking under 100 people. That's not, so that's the problem. I'm not on CNN where we would be talking millions of people, no doubt. That's the problem. I'm not on Democracy Now! That might also be millions. Certainly
you have to pass,
hundreds of thousands of people. So that's the disconnect. It's not the reception. It's not, the liberals or the conservatives don't listen, or the South doesn't listen, or the West doesn't. No. I've spoken to all of those groups, all of those parts of the country, and gotten very similar reactions. The problem is, when the media shuts you out, as it has to a considerable degree, then you're never talking to more. It's always well under 1,000 people. Unlike Fox News, NPR, CNN, Democracy Now!, that have these very large audiences. So the disconnect is, how do we reach audiences? That's the challenge that we're all trying to, keep trying to overcome.
That's right.
All right, Allison.
But I could go now because I do.
I know that you need
maybe
to go.
Maybe I could just talk. But maybe this is a good place because I do have a meeting right. I'm now in Washington D.C. and the person that was going to meet with me this morning has arrived, and I better
nice to meet you.
Get to that now.
Allison, thank you.
But thanks very much for having me on.
Thank you, and that's the problem. You've outlined the problem we're dealing with very well. If we had access to 60 minutes to give out all of the information that we've got on the same case that they covered, it would have had a whole different reaction to the American people. They don't call it programming on television for nothing. Thanks again, Allison.
Thanks. And I'll just say again, our website is ifamericansknew.org. So if people go to that website and tell others about it, that'll help. Thanks very much.
That will be linked from now on my website. It's linked right now. If people go to my website, freeamerican.com, it's up there. Thank you very much, Allison.
And also, I forgot to mention, the new organization I'm with is Council for the National Interest. We have a website, and we'll be expanding that hopefully in the coming months. That one is cnionline.org, Council for the National Interest. So hopefully people will visit both of those. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I will get that up. CNIonline.org.
Yeah. CNI. It's CNIonline.org. .org.
Okay, we'll put that up on the website. Thanks again, Allison.
Thank you.
God
Goodbye.
bless. Keep you safe. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
All right, John. That was the easiest interview I've ever done.
She's done a lot of great work on a mainstream level, which is really, I'm coming around to believe that that's really where the work needs to be done, to get people to take that first step to cross over and realize that all of the information they've been fed, I say all their lives, people might want to cut that down to a more manageable size, in the last 10 or 20 years, all of the information we've received has been slanted to blind us to the atrocities that have been going on in Palestine for near 100 years at this point, where people are not treated as humans. And what I wanted to get at from her, and we didn't really have the time to do it, was this attitude, this Jewish attitude, this Israeli attitude toward the rest of the world that is enumerated in the Talmud, where these people they're killing, they can kill with impunity because they're taught to believe these people are animals and beasts. Jews are taught to believe that you and me, Clayton, are animals or beasts, and that's why they have no trouble harvesting organs from the Palestinians or the Bahrainis, and conducting all these atrocities. And I think Allison might be a little scared of the both of us because we are rather forthright in our commentaries about people of the Jewish persuasion, whereas she's a lot more diplomatic and tries to stay on that mainstream level where she points out the Israeli atrocities. But at this point, it's a really tall order to point out Israeli atrocities to the American people when it's the Americans who are committing the atrocities for reasons the American people don't really understand. And if you try to resolve the Israeli problem without dealing with the problem of Jewishness and Judaism and Jews, you're doomed to failure. You're doomed to endless hearings with politicians who nod at you and say, yes, we'll get right on that and do what we can, and then you never hear another thing about it. And I think she's been at this 10 years and fighting the good fight, but she keeps running into that, and I don't know. I'd like to see her more, a little more pugnacious, but then that's our style.
Well, the article I'm working on right now, John, says we've been putting the wrong people in prison. Maybe we actually got it right with this, this superior being that raped a maid in a hotel. It's little incidents like that sometimes upset an apple cart. But I got this story that we were talking about. She was talking about the Palestinians being shot across the border, 10 protesters killed, more than 100 wounded, and Israel said it was investigating the casualties. I said that's like asking Silverstein to handle the investigation of the bombs in the basement and the lobbies of the Twin Towers, or to explain why there were only 3,000 people in the towers at the time. What happened to the 10,000 employees that were usually there? Oh yeah, there you go.
That is a good analogy, Clayton.
And I've said here in this article that this information came streaming across my computer, interrupting, diverting, and expanding the flow of thoughts, rushing into my consciousness as I devoured well-written words by various writers all over the world. I was still stunned at the thought of my friend and regular guest Edgar Steele spending the rest of his life in prison because a judge denied him a 3-day delay to fly in the expert witnesses who would have provided testimony as to the tampering with and the editing of that tape. And that movie that came on, that clip that came on 60 Minutes, demonizing the sovereigns. Think about that. That's any American that thinks you're free, thinks you're a free American, thinks you're a sovereign, is somehow now the enemy, just like the Palestinians are the enemy. Now it's those patriots. Now it's those militia guys. Now it's those Christian identity folks, because they think they're the chosen people. And also in the same little breath here, we got our wars that we can't afford have expanded from Iraq and Afghanistan into Pakistan. Our alliance via John McCain with Al-Qaeda in Libya, that's really the confirmation of that it has always been Al-CIA, duh. And our troops in Afghanistan are in total control of the #1 source of heroin in the world. Damn those Taliban! We were doing fine until they started destroying the poppies. They forced us to intervene, and Gaddafi turned into a do-gooder dude with that underground river he built without IMF money.
The Libyan thing really, I think it's more significant than most people realize. It's now out in the open that American policy run by the Jews is going around the world openly destabilizing other countries, openly conducting acts of treason in other countries, in order so they can get their preferred leader in power, which they have in most of the countries of the world. They're sycophants to the United States.
And what's your first name, by the way? Al-Qaeda is a rebel force in Libya. McCain shaking hands with our public enemy #1, Al-Qaeda. What the hell is that?
Al-Qaeda is a department of the CIA. I think most people realize, or a lot of people realize that now. The mainstream doesn't realize it because they're still watching television. But Al-Qaeda is a creation of Zbigniew Brzezinski, and he hired Osama bin Laden back along the trail to do lots of things, but unfortunately Osama died in 2001. And I doubt that they kept his body on ice, and when they supposedly threw it into the ocean, that gives validity to the lie. Because if they had actually had him, if they had actually shot him, you can believe you would have seen the most grisly pictures of him on the front page of the New York Times. It's that whole story is fake, and any discussion of it is an utter distraction at this point. What I was trying to get at with Allison, which she really wouldn't make the leap because that's not her thing, was that America now is behaving exactly like Israel, or maybe the reverse is true. It's hard to tell sometimes. Where you can go into any country and kill anyone for any reason. This is cause for alarm, folks.
All you got to do is declare them an enemy, and they declared the American people. Now, we were sold into slavery, statutory slavery, May 8th, 1933. You know, that's when we became the property of the banksters and the bankruptcy that Roosevelt signed. I've got a lot of paperwork on that, documentation on that.
Yeah, that's one of the big moments. But there's 3 or 4 of those big moments in American history where the course of the country was changed by the same people every time. Hey, I got a funny story for you.
Go ahead.
I'm working on this story. I've been working on it for a long time because I have to get it out of an old book and it's hard to read. That's a good excuse. Anyway, where the hidden hand, also known as the Jewish community, killed all of the czars in Russia in the 19th century. Actually, it was 4 out of 5, and they killed the 5th one in the 20th century. And this was all before the Bolshevik Revolution, where the Jews killed that czar. I'm not sure if that's the 5th or 6th one, and his whole family. But I was doing that story and doing research, and then it hit me like a ton of bricks that this story leads directly into an amazing fact that most people don't realize, is that all of the Americans, presidents who were assassinated either directly or indirectly by Jews. Every single one. You can call it 7 or you can call it 9, because you can add on William Henry Harrison and Zachary Taylor to the early part of the list. They were both killed by Jewish doctors. Abraham Lincoln was killed by someone acting in the interests of the Jewish bankers. James Garfield was killed 2 weeks after he said, the people with the money from behind the scenes control everything. William McKinley was killed in 1900 by a supposed Polish anarchist. Have you ever heard of an anarchist who wasn't Jewish? But Leon Choglos, the man who killed McKinley, got his gun from Emma Goldman at the Jewish Working Man's Hall in Brooklyn, and went out to Buffalo and killed the president. One of the presidents most people don't know was assassinated was Warren Harding, who was poisoned in San Francisco and killed by Jewish doctors after he had a big fight with Samuel Guggenheim over a large tract of land in Alaska. Guggenheim. Franklin Roosevelt was done away with by his handlers in a hot tub in Hot Springs, kind of like the way Matt Simmons bought it here recently. And, of course, John F. Kennedy was dispatched after signing the executive order about the Federal Reserve and making that video. You know, there's an important video that's floating around on YouTube about Kennedy where he tells us, and I didn't realize at the time, I was like 19 when he was killed, and I certainly didn't realize at the time, and I really haven't realized it all these years later, but that video he made just a week or so before his assassination tells exactly what's going on, about how there's this multinational force that's the epitome of evil that is working behind the scenes and has penetrated everything. And I'm thinking, holy cow, I never could have heard that in 1963, but I should have heard it at least by the 90s, and I still didn't get it until the other day that he came right out and said that the power of the American government is superseded by this invisible force. And if that isn't on target, I don't know what is. But we all missed it because we're in the great Jewish American TV coma, and our lives have been reduced to a brief appearance on Oprah Winfrey, right? It's bad. It's really bad. Our minds have been shrunk by this television and this Jewish propaganda that comes from all the newspapers. It's like when you consider the history of the New York Times going back to the 1800s, they have parroted the Jewish line all along, shaped reality, ignored atrocities, and done very bad things for the freedom of America. In fact, the New York Times has been the main instrument for totalitarianism in America, and it still is.
Well, the Rothschilds bought Reuters at the first part of the 1900s. And they've gone in and taken over the editorials of all the papers. You know, it's whether they own it or not. You know, Hollywood is run by Jews. You know, and you know, God, and this is the thing that really bothers me. You know, I even had a lady friend. Lady comes over all the time, and it's always been kind of a strange relationship because she voted for Obama, but what the hell, you know? I mean, it didn't make any difference whether you voted for Obama or McCain. You know, you got the same thing. But you know, she suddenly she looks at me. She sees this video that 60 Minutes put up, and I want to touch on that because this is trying to demonize anybody that thinks of themselves as being sovereign, and I certainly think I don't think I'm a slave of the banksters. You know, I think I've stepped out of that. I guess that makes me an outlaw, or radical, or an extremist.
What are you, delusional? Of course you're a slave to the bankers.
some of us are just less of a slave than others, I guess. But if you're speaking out, and Jerry Kane was speaking out, and he was killed without a trial, just like Osama bin Laden, or these people are they're just